When Clint Eastwood stepped onto the red carpet at a high-profile Hollywood event, dressed in his usual understated style, no one expected it to spark a media firestorm. But within hours, the industry's so-called elites had turned a harmless piece of jewelry into a scandal, ridiculing a man they saw as just another outdated relic of the past. What they didn't realize was that Clint Eastwood wasn't the kind of man to apologize or back down. And what happened next would become a defining moment that Hollywood would never forget. The camera panned across the dimly lit saloon, the scent of aged whiskey and worn leather lingering in the air. But this wasn't a movie set. This was Clint Eastwood's reality, a living legend. A man who had shaped Hollywood on his own terms and never looked back. For over 6 decades, Clint embodied the kind of man the world seemed to be running low on. Gritty, disciplined, and unapologetically himself. He was the last of a dying breed, a throwback to an era where a man's word meant something and respect was earned, not given. From his early days in spaghetti westerns to his later years directing films Hollywood was too afraid to make, Clint never wavered. He didn't chase trends, he didn't bow to industry politics, and he sure as hell didn't apologize for being exactly who he was. That's what set him apart. Even as Hollywood shifted, embracing new ideologies and narratives, Clint stood firm. While younger actors carefully curated their public personas to fit the latest cause or movement, he remained exactly the same. A cowboy, a storyteller, and above all, a man who didn't give a damn what people thought. Critics had tried to cancel him before. They labeled him outdated, called his movies problematic. But Clint didn't engage. He didn't explain himself. He just kept working, letting his legacy speak louder than the noise. And the truth was, despite all the backlash, people still loved him. His films continued to rake in millions. His name still commanded respect. Maybe that's why when Clint Eastwood walked into that Hollywood event, dressed in his usual understated style, black boots, a simple button-down, and a well-worn jacket, he didn't think twice about the crucifix around his neck. To him, it was just a part of who he was. To Hollywood, it was something else entirely. Within hours, a storm was brewing. The media was about to make the mistake of thinking they could humiliate Clint Eastwood. They had no idea what was coming. Next, the flash of cameras was relentless, a blinding assault from every angle. Clint Eastwood barely blinked. He had walked through tougher storms than this. The event was one of Hollywood's biggest nights. Red carpets, designer gowns, overpriced champagne in delicate flutes. The kind of place where celebrities made carefully crafted political statements, where the right words at the right moment could turn someone into a headline. But Clint, he wasn't there for any of that. He had been invited to present an honorary award, a rare moment when even Hollywood's elite had to acknowledge his legendary status. He had no intention of making waves, no agenda, no carefully planned speech. Just another night, another honor, another reminder to the world that he was still very much Clint Eastwood. Then someone noticed it, a small silver crucifix hanging from his neck. The cameras zoomed in. The murmurs started. And just like that, a piece of jewelry became a scandal. At first, it was just whispers, a few side eyes from industry insiders, a couple of raised eyebrows from reporters. But the moment the first tweet went out, everything changed. Why is Clint Eastwood wearing a crucifix? What's he trying to say? Another old Hollywood relic refusing to evolve. Do we really still glorify this guy? Within minutes, the narrative was set. It wasn't just an accessory anymore, it was a statement. One that Hollywood's self-appointed moral gatekeepers weren't going to let slide. The media headlines came fast and ruthless. Clint Eastwood's red carpet appearance sparks controversy over religious symbolism. Does Eastwood's crucifix send a problematic message in modern Hollywood? Out of touch, Clint Eastwood's jewelry choice ignites debate. And then came the pundits, the late-night hosts, the social media warriors, each one more desperate than the last to paint Clint as something he wasn't. The irony? Clint still hadn't said a word. But that didn't matter, because in today's Hollywood, silence is a crime. And wearing a cross without issuing a prepared statement was apparently an act of rebellion. What they didn't realize, what they never seemed to realize, was that Clint Eastwood wasn't the kind of man you could back into a corner. And when he finally did speak, it wouldn't just shut them down. It would break the internet. It started as a whisper, then became a murmur. And within hours, it was an all-out media firestorm. Clint Eastwood, one of Hollywood's last standing legends, had committed the unforgivable sin. He had worn a funny how Hollywood preaches diversity, unless that diversity includes traditional values. The more the media pushed the narrative that Clint was out of touch, the more everyday Americans called them out for their blatant hypocrisy. Conservative commentators jumped in almost immediately. Tucker Carlson, Clint Eastwood wears a crucifix and suddenly he's divisive. Meanwhile, the same industry that worships at the altar of moral relativism wants to lecture us on what's offensive. Please. Ben Shapiro. Let me get this straight. Hollywood can shove its progressive agenda down America's throat 24/7, but an 80-year-old actor wears a small cross and it's suddenly a problem. Spare me. But it wasn't just the commentators. Firefighters, veterans, single mothers, blue-collar workers, people who actually lived in the real world, started speaking up. One viral Facebook post from a retired Marine summed it up best. Clint Eastwood wears a cross, and people freak out. Meanwhile, we have celebrities openly mocking faith, tradition, and family values, and that's fine. The world has lost its mind. And the more the media tried to control the story, the more obvious it became. This wasn't just about Clint Eastwood, it was about something bigger. The battle lines had been drawn, and whether Hollywood liked it or not, they weren't the ones controlling the narrative anymore. For days, the media machine ran at full speed. The think pieces were written, the talk show hosts delivered their monologues, and the Twitter warriors exhausted their outrage. Through it all, Clint Eastwood remained silent. That silence only made them more desperate. They needed him to engage, to defend himself, to give them something to twist into a new headline. Then, finally, it happened. Clint Eastwood agreed to an interview. No Hollywood fluff, no carefully orchestrated PR stunt. Just a quiet sit-down conversation with an independent journalist who had covered his career for decades. The cameras rolled. The reporter leaned in. "So, Clint," he began, "there's been a lot of controversy around you lately. People are saying your crucifix was a political statement. Some are calling it divisive. What do you say to that?" Eastwood didn't flinch. He didn't rush to defend himself. He simply sat back in his chair, folded his hands, and gave the simplest answer possible. "I've lived long enough to see trends come and go," he said, his voice steady. "I don't change for them." Silence. The weight of his words hung in the air, heavier than any monologue, any Twitter thread, any think piece. The journalist hesitated, almost caught off guard. "So, you're saying this wasn't a statement?" Eastwood smirked. "No more than breathing is a statement. The simplicity of it was devastating. No anger, no defensiveness. Just the unshakable confidence of a man who had seen it all, outlived every critic, and knew none of this nonsense mattered in the grand scheme of things." The clip spread like wildfire. People latched onto his words, quoting them in memes, printing them on t-shirts, sharing them with captions like, "Clint Eastwood just ended cancel culture in one sentence. A real man doesn't apologize for who he is. I don't change for trends. Iconic." Meanwhile, the media, stunned into silence, scrambled for a new angle. They had spent days attacking him, waiting for a defensive reaction, a meltdown, anything they could exploit. Instead, Clint Eastwood had given them nothing, and in doing so, he had won. Because in a world where everyone is desperate to prove themselves, there's nothing more powerful than a man who has nothing to prove. Sensing that Clint wasn't rattled, the reporter leaned in closer, eyebrows raised, voice dropping to that low, measured tone journalists use when they think they're about to make history. "But Clint," he pressed, "surely you understand why people reacted the way they did. Some feel that wearing a crucifix in a public setting, especially in Hollywood, sends a message. Given the divisiveness in today's world, do you think you should have been more mindful of that?" A lesser man might have stumbled, might have given a long-winded, carefully worded answer to appease both sides. The debate raged online, with headlines trying to reframe the narrative. Actor dismisses criticism over religious symbolism in interview. But it was too late. No one was debating anymore. No one was offended. They were cheering. And for the first time in a long time, it felt like Hollywood wasn't in control of the conversation. Because Clint Eastwood had done what no one else in the industry dared to do. He refused to apologize. And the world loved him for it. The moment his words hit, the internet, everything shifted. What had started as a media hit piece had spiraled completely out of their control. Mainstream outlets, once so confident in their takedown of a Hollywood legend, suddenly found themselves on the defensive. They scrambled. Some reporters backpedaled, claiming Clint's statement had been taken out of context. Eastwood's comment wasn't meant as an attack, but rather a reflection on media sensationalism, they insisted. Others tried to downplay the backlash, pretending it wasn't happening. While the internet may be debating this, most Americans aren't that concerned. Then there were those who doubled down, still clinging to the hope of regaining control. Eastwood's response was defiant, but does it ignore the very real concerns? People have about outdated symbols in Hollywood, but it was too late. The internet had already decided who won. The clips, the memes, the reaction videos, they were everywhere. The moment had cemented itself in pop culture, and worst of all, for the media. People weren't listening to them anymore. For years they dictated the conversation, told audiences what to be outraged about, who to cancel, who to celebrate. But Clint Eastwood had flipped the script. By saying nothing at first, by refusing to play the game, he forced them to chase the narrative instead of controlling it. Now they were scrambling. Their credibility was slipping with every failed attempt to spin the story. Because for the first time in a long time, a Hollywood legend had stood his ground, and the world stood with him. Breaking ranks. The controversy had become a test. Would Hollywood fall in line and condemn him, or would anyone have the courage to speak out? At first, most celebrities stayed silent, afraid of backlash from the industry gatekeepers. Then, one broke ranks. A respected veteran actor took to Instagram with a simple post, a picture of himself and Clint on a movie set, arms crossed, both wearing crucifixes. The caption read, "I know Clint Eastwood. I've worked with him. And let me tell you something. This man has done more for people in this business than half the hypocrites calling him problematic." The post exploded. Fans flooded the comments, thanking him for having the guts to stand with Clint. Then another actor spoke out, then another. Then a former stuntman shared a story about how Clint had personally stepped in when a production company tried to underpay the crew. Clint Eastwood isn't just a great filmmaker, he's a great man. The fact that people are attacking him over a damn necklace tells you everything you need to know about Hollywood today. And just like that, the floodgates opened. More and more stories surfaced, painting a picture of a man who had spent decades quietly helping others, never asking for recognition. Meanwhile, Clint's critics weren't backing down. A handful of younger celebrities tried to keep the outrage alive. Respect to Clint Eastwood as a filmmaker, but we have to recognize when certain icons refuse to evolve with the times. Hollywood shouldn't be a place where outdated values are given a platform. But every time they tried to drag Clint, it only fueled the backlash further. The comment sections under their tweets were brutal. "You guys love to talk about tolerance until someone wears a cross. Imagine being this fragile over a piece of jewelry. Clint Eastwood has more integrity in one finger than your whole career. It was becoming clear, the more they attacked Clint, the stronger his support became. Because this wasn't just about one man anymore. It was about Hollywood's hypocrisy. It was about real strength. It was about a culture that had spent too long telling people what they were allowed to believe. And Clint Eastwood? He wasn't just winning the debate, he was changing it entirely. A bigger question at first, the controversy had been about Clint Eastwood and a crucifix. But now it was about something bigger. The more people dissected what had happened, the more they started asking the hard questions, the ones Hollywood wasn't prepared to answer. Why is faith considered controversial, but other bold statements are celebrated? It was perfectly acceptable for celebrities to wear political slogans, radical messages, or provocative imagery. But a simple crucifix? That sparked outrage. Cable news segments debated it. YouTube commentators tore into it. Even late-night hosts, the same ones who mocked Clint just days before, were suddenly shifting their tone. And it wasn't just conservative voices speaking out anymore. Moderate and even liberal commentators, people with no particular allegiance to Clint or his beliefs, started pointing out the hypocrisy. Look, you don't have to agree with Clint Eastwood on everything, but let's be real. This is insane. If a younger celebrity had walked the red carpet wearing a symbol of any other religion, Hollywood would be calling it brave and important. Podcasts, Twitter Spaces, and independent media latched onto the bigger issue. Hollywood's selective tolerance was being exposed in real time. This isn't about a crucifix. This is about control. People started compiling examples, celebrities who had worn controversial symbols, pushed divisive statements, and been applauded for it. A-list stars sporting shirts with provocative political messages, no backlash. Musicians showing up in religiously offensive outfits, no backlash. Athletes openly mocking faith on national television, no backlash. But Clint Eastwood wears a simple cross and suddenly it's a problem. Even people who didn't consider themselves religious started questioning what was really happening. Was this really about Clint Eastwood? Or was it about something much bigger? And if Hollywood could get away with attacking a man as respected and untouchable as Eastwood, who would be next? Hollywood loses control. The conversation had shifted. This wasn't just about Clint anymore. It was about power, influence, and the people who decide which beliefs are acceptable. And Hollywood. They were losing control of the narrative. They waited for Clint's next move. They expected him to release a statement, maybe clarify his words, do some soft damage control. That's how it usually worked. A celebrity steps out of line, there's outrage, and eventually they bend the knee. But Clint Eastwood, he did the one thing they never expected. He did nothing. No tweets, no press releases, no interviews. Instead, he did what Clint Eastwood has always done. He kept moving forward. A few days after the controversy hit its peak, Clint was spotted, grabbing coffee at a small diner in Carmel, California, where he's lived for decades, and around his neck, the same crucifix, not hidden, not removed, right there in plain sight. A fan snapped a picture and posted it online with the caption, "Still Clint, still standing." The photo exploded across the internet. People respected him even more, not because he made a big statement, but because he didn't. No grandstanding, no victim narrative, no dramatic defiance, just Clint Eastwood, living his life as if the entire controversy never happened, because to him it didn't matter. And that's what made it so powerful. They wanted to break him. Instead, he didn't even flinch. You know you've won when your biggest response is just going about your day. A real man doesn't need to explain himself. Hollywood expected Clint to engage, to defend, to fight back. Instead, he just kept being Clint Eastwood. And that's why, even in silence, he won. takedown that backfired. The Clint Eastwood controversy was supposed to be just another Hollywood takedown. The media had played this game 1,000 times before.